part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
The 1-1 pitch. A swing and a drive to deep right. Away back. Goal!
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Guardians of the Land MLB podcast here on the Press Play Podcast Network. I am your host, John Telich. Let's update you on what has happened with the Guardians since the last time we spoke. Well, basically, they have become very good at treading water. That's all they have done in the past couple of weeks. They played one game less in terms of wins and losses than the Minnesota Twins did over that stretch of time and dropped one game in the standings. So as we sit here, before we post this podcast, the Guardians are off today, Monday, and then they start that series with the Los Angeles Dodgers at Progressive Field starting on Tuesday. So the Guardians are 59 and 66. That's 7 games under 500, and they are 6 games behind the Minnesota Twins, who sit at 65 and 60. And as I alluded to the last couple of weeks, or last 10 games, let's say, well, the Guardians only played 4-6 ball over that course. They have lost 2 in a row, and the Minnesota Twins have not played much better. They are 5-5. So, Guardians 6 back. The Tigers, who had their way with the Guardians in the most recent series at Progressive Field, they are 7.5 games behind, with the White Sox way back at 15.5, and the Royals are 25.5 games behind the first place Minnesota Twins. A couple of weeks ago, when I sat down with Adam the Bull, we basically said the season was over. The chances of them making any kind of ground up and surpassing the Twins, it certainly looked like that would not be the case. And you never want to say never, because 6 games can be made up. But we haven't seen any consistency from this baseball team this year. Haven't seen long win streaks. They haven't gotten hot and stayed hot. It seems like they get hot for a few games and then someone pours water on the fire. So in the past couple of weeks, treading water. But what happened over the weekend, specifically on Saturday, was noteworthy at Progressive Field as the good crowds continue to come out to see the Guardians play baseball, but they're not seeing very much winning baseball at the corner of Carnegie and Ontario. But on Saturday, what a day it was. The Hall of Fame, the new class as it were, and into the new class goes one slugger by the name of Manny Ramirez. A fan favorite, to say the least, and so many noteworthy accomplishments that man had for the Cleveland Guardians. Well, of course, when he played, it was the Cleveland Indians back in the early 90s. He broke into the major leagues in 94. He was part of that team that had a bunch of veterans to help buoy the young upstarts such as himself and Jim Thome, who were relatively young pups in Major League Baseball back in those years when the Indians started to make the playoffs and had those 2 World Series appearances in 95 and 97. Thank you, Joe Noga of the Cleveland Plain Dealer in Cleveland.com for synopsizing, if that is the proper word, for at least summing up some of the great accomplishments that Manny Ramirez had during those 8 seasons that he wore a Cleveland Indians uniform. And we all know a lot of those times the uniform he was wearing was parts of other individuals' uniforms that he just happened to borrow for the day. All right, his list of accomplishments are these. A member of 2 American League champion and 5 Central Division championship teams. He was the runner-up in 1994 for the American League Rookie of the Year. He had 4 All-Star Game appearances as a member of the Cleveland Indians. He won 3 Silver Slugger awards while he wore that Cleveland uniform, as the all-time franchise leader in slugging percentage and OPS as well. And he is 3rd all-time in franchise home runs, hitting very close to the same amount for the Cleveland Indians. And then, of course, what he did up in Boston. Of course, what he did in Boston was amazing as well. I'm not done with the accomplishments in Cleveland. 4th all-time in franchise on-base percentage. His on-base percentage was .407. 8th all-time in franchise RBI. He had 804 of those. 9th all-time in franchise extra base hits at 484. And that franchise record 165 runs batted in during that amazing 1999 season. Simply stated, it was just so much fun to watch Manny Ramirez do his thing at the plate, meticulously, a guy that prepared more so than most other guys on the team, a student of the game, studied a lot of film or tape, as it were, of opposing pitchers, kept books on pitchers, really did his homework, and then when he was in the batter's box doing his training for each and every game, there was a specific purpose in mind for what he was doing, and it showed. He looked so comfortable in that batter's box, no matter the situation. If he was staring down Dennis Eckersley with a game on the line, or if it was early in the game, he just looked like he was having not necessarily a great time, but a relaxed and confident time when he was at the plate. And his numbers speak for themselves. So while we've updated you a bit on how the Guardians have been doing, or in some cases not doing, let's also take this time to sit back and look back at what it was like to witness Manny Ramirez coming up as a Major League Baseball player. And so I thought I would bring in my former Fox 8 colleague, Mark Schroeder, who was there for many of those contests. First, when Manny got to the major leagues in 1994. Mark also went to his high school in Washington Heights in the Bronx to do stories about the origins of the legend that is Manny Ramirez. So he knows the legend that is Manny Ramirez quite well. So we're going to take a break here on the Guardians of the Land MLB podcast. And then after this break, I'll introduce you to my former colleague, Mark Schroeder, and we will talk all things Manny Ramirez. We'll catch you guys in a couple of minutes.
What's up, everyone? I'm Holly Wetzel.
And I'm Tybus Powell.
And we are your hosts of The Orange is Oranger, a Cleveland Browns podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network. We give you all the dog pound coverage that you'll need to get you through the regular season, hopeful postseason, and I'd say off-season, Tybus, but is there really ever an off-season for this team?
Thankfully for our podcast, Holly, there really never is when it comes to the Cleveland Browns. Don't miss our breakdown of each week's matchup, game recaps, and any and all news out of Berea to feed your Browns appetite. As we know, Holly, dogs gotta eat.
Yes, they do. So hit that subscribe button and never miss an episode of the Orange is Oranger, Cleveland Browns podcast on the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Amico from Cavs on the Break NBA podcast. Be sure to give us a listen for all your Cleveland Cavaliers recaps, analysis, breakdowns, draft talk, free agency. The list goes on and on. Give us a listen, Cavs on the Break NBA podcast.
Welcome back, everybody. Guardians of the Land MLB podcast. John Telich here, back from the break and hopping on with one of my former colleagues and great buddies in the business, Mr. Mark Schroeder. Many times we spent up in the press box at the old Jacobs Field, if you will, even the place that preceded it, Cleveland Municipal Stadium, all the while seeing whether or not this talented kid from Washington Heights in the Bronx of New York, Mr. Manny Ramirez, would be the real deal in Major League Baseball. Do you recall your first time you crossed paths with Mr. Manny Ramirez, Mark?
Hey, John, thanks for having me. And yes, I do. And the reason we're really kind of laughing is John and I having a long, storied relationship with Manny every day in the clubhouse for every home game over at Jacobs Field or at spring training. You don't know which Manny you were going to get that day. Manny wanted to speak Spanish to you. Manny would speak English to you. Manny who wouldn't want to talk to you at all and just laugh and smile and nod and walk along. So I remember it was funny the first time that I wanted to speak with him, because remember, he was drafted, I think, third overall, I think, by the Indians, or third or fourth overall in 1991.
Third or fourth. Yes.
Yeah. And I remember, so he was highly touted, just like Bartolo. A few years later, Bartolo Colon was so highly, he was their phenom. They were those two guys were the biggest phenoms that they had selected so high in the draft. So I remember asking Manny, approaching him for an interview, and he looked at me and he said, "Hey, no habla, man." I was like, "No habla? This guy grew up in Washington Heights. What is it? No, come on. What come on." He was playing with me, so yeah. Little did I hear him later speaking English to, like Oral Hershiser in the clubhouse. I'm like, "What do you mean, no habla, man? What are you talking about?" So, you had to learn his character and his personality, and you kind of went with it, and he would have fun playing jokes on you just as much as you were trying to just get an interview with him. So yeah, my first encounter with Manny was, I don't speak English, but I feel like it, I will. Or I want to talk to you, I will. That kind of thing.
He really was a delight to be around, and it was so cool to watch him hone his craft trades. I mean, just the amazing amount of work that he did before a game. And, the legend is he would come to the park, late in the morning, do work, and then go home, come back, work out again, batting practice. Just a phenomenal talent. But you had an opportunity, if I recall, and refresh my memory,
Sure.
For Channel 8, you were in the home of Manny Ramirez. You did some reporting work in Washington Heights, and really kind of tried to discover what was the legend of this high school home run hitting talent. What was that like? What was what kind of hunt were you on?
So I remember our approach to our news director, John, you and I going up and saying, "Hey, if we could get into the opportunity of some of these," because we had, I believe at the time, oh man, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we had 12 or 15 Latin American players, and most of them were from the Dominican Republic and then Puerto Rico. But the big thing was that in talking with the news director was to say, "Hey, look, the Indians are red hot. They've never been hotter than they had been since 1954. Can you give us this opportunity to be able to make something happen with some of these players?" And I remember approaching Manny, and he just, about going to Washington Heights, because we went in for a Yankees series in August. As a matter of fact, it would have been, as a matter of fact, it was the anniversary was just a week ago, because it was the day we were in Yankee Stadium also happened to be the day that Mickey Mantle passed away, August 17th. And so we just happened to be there that day. But I was doing the story on Manny. So we spent two of the three games, or maybe the three games, covering a little bit of the game, but mostly it was trying to get into the neighborhood of Washington Heights. Because at that time, John, you can remember, or any Indians fan at that time would remember, Manny had a huge contingency from his neighborhood that would show up in the grandstand seats at Yankee Stadium and cheer him on. And they would sing, and they'd bring all kinds of instruments and just have a good time. And they were just cheering Manny on every time he came to the plate, or he made an out, or he, whatever he did, got a base hit. And so it was a very fun thing to watch. So that was part of that entertainment value, is to go out there, interview this section of his high school classmates and neighborhood friends that rallied, that Manny got on tickets to be able to sit there in Yankee Stadium and cheer him on. So in that process, Ron Straw, who was the videographer, and I were standing behind the plate, and we were talking to someone. I cannot remember exactly who it was. We were speaking with somebody, and someone said, "Oh, this guy over here, he's a friend of Manny Ramirez," and he was sitting behind the plate. And I said, "Oh, you are?" And I introduced myself, and he was a police officer in Washington Heights, and he had known Manny since his childhood. So anyhow, I spoke with him about, is it possible to, show us where he lived? And he said, "Yeah, sure. Meet us at the precinct, tomorrow, and, we'll take you out." So I said, "This is incredible. I mean, what a great opportunity," because I didn't know where he lived, I kind of knew where Washington Heights was, but I wouldn't know what apartment building he lived in. So we Ron Straw and I, we took a cab. We went to the police precinct, and I'll never forget meeting this police officer and his partner. And his sergeant gave us the okay to ride along with them. And he said, I'll never forget this, because Ron Straw looked at me like, are you sure you want to do this? The police officer said, I think we might need you to put on some bulletproof vests. I said, what? He said, no, man. He said, where you're going is pretty dangerous. I said, seriously? He said, oh, yeah, sure, absolutely. Wow. And they decided then against doing that. But we got in the back of the squad car, in the patrol car, and we drove to the apartment building where Manny grew up. And he also showed us Washington Heights High School, where Manny played, the baseball diamond, which was AstroTurf. It's like on a bluff. I'll get into that in a moment. But going to his apartment, it was nice to be police escorted because he got us in. So he came in, and he was bilingual, and he rang the doorbell of the main building. And the superintendent came out. They call him the super in New York. So the super came out, and the police officer spoke Spanish to the super and to explain that we're here from this TV station in Cleveland and want to go to Manny Ramirez's, apartment where he grew up in. So the super agreed. And so we went up. It had to be 6-7 stories, but we went up, and the apartment was vacant. So there was nobody actually living in it. So he opened it up for us to be able to see, the living area, the dining area, the couple of bedrooms that were there, the view out the back window, which overlooked basically all of the Bronx. It was just high enough to be able to see everything,
Could you see Yankee Stadium from there? Could you see Yankee Stadium from there?
Not from there.
All right.
But it will. But there is going to be another one that's a link to that. So after we got done with seeing this tiny apartment, that this he was probably the most prolific guy at the time, or he was just starting, right? I mean, by 95, he had made a name for himself. So, you're looking at this tiny apartment where he came from, amongst the high crime area that he was in Washington Heights. And again, predominantly Dominican immigrants, and Americans that had come from the Dominican Republic, just like his parents did. And so there's a lot of Spanish and a lot of English being spoken there. So we go to Washington Heights High School, so the police officers take us there. And I remember we got out of the car, and there's the baseball field right next to the high school. And again, it's overlooking this. It's on this bluff, but there's this big fence that you can't get into the field things. And so he gets somebody to come over, open the gates for us. We walk in, and there's right field. So there's right field overlooking this bluff. And John, it's almost like a straight drop, behind right field. But behind that, if you turn around or you're looking straight out from right field, there's Yankee Stadium. It's right there. I mean, when you talk about playing in the shadows of Yankee Stadium, he almost literally was. I mean, which is really amazing. By the way, people may not know this too, but Washington Heights also had an alumnus who was another fabulous Major League Baseball player and prolific hitter, Rod Carew.
Who's that? Oh, Rod Carew. I did not know he was. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, Carew's a graduate and alum of Washington Heights High School also. So, interestingly, those two fabulous hitters in Major League history, came out of the same high school.
Wow.
I remember talking to a couple of his friends at Yankee Stadium. Some of them were his classmates, and I remember this one guy. He was so funny because he was so excited to talk about Manny. And he said, Manny, Manny was always on the ball field. He'd say, Manny, come on, gotta come into class. You gotta come into class. He goes, no, man, I'm playing baseball. I gotta play baseball. I'm gonna have fun playing baseball. He's like, no, man, you gotta get here. Otherwise you're never gonna graduate. Come on, man. I would laugh because of the stories of him talking about that. And remember talking to Manny in that story about that. And I told him that story about this guy, and he knew exactly who I was talking about. Wow. He's like, oh yeah. He used to always tell me, you got to get in here, man. Otherwise you're never going to graduate if you don't get in here and stop playing baseball and start doing your classwork before you get outside again. So,
it's amazing how the legend kind of grew, this high school hitting phenom. And then how it would work out that not only, as you said, his field in the shadows of Yankee Stadium, but one of his biggest first moments in Major League Baseball at that same park. What, a couple of home runs in one game. I mean, what a way to kind of make your name known in Major League Baseball, right?
Absolutely. And, I think the other thing that was interesting to me is that I remember, as you do, John, 94, the Indians were exploding. That year, I mean, all of a sudden, here we go. And then the strike hits. But before the baseball strike in 94 hit in midsummer, the Indians and the White Sox were neck and neck, and they were clawing, and they were both fantastic. I'll never forget this, talking to John Hart, because he had built that team, from the draft picks to, the free agents that he was, really crossing his fingers, still had 1 or 2 good years left, right?
Yeah, right.
El Presidente, Dennis Martinez and Oral and Eddie Murray, handful of guys, right? Take the veterans to be able to help the young guys, but just hoping those guys had still some Hall of Fame qualities or power to be able to make something happen with the young kids, or still in the lineup or on the pitching mound. I'll never forget this. I'm standing at home plate. A bunch of us are talking in a beautiful evening. I don't remember who the Indians were playing. It didn't matter, other than the fact that the sellouts were starting and the people were rushing in to see BP. They wanted to see batting practice, because it was that you had to absorb everything, right, John? You couldn't even get tickets at that time. So John Hart is standing at home plate. They had cleared everything off. They're standing at home plate, and he's holding, a nice little press conference for us. And we were talking about, can you believe what's happening here? Can you believe this electricity and this magic? And I'll never forget him saying, this is unbelievable. He said, but he goes, we have a guy who is turning into one of the greatest hitters we may ever see. And you're thinking, okay, he's talking about Eddie Murray, right? Or something, whatever. No, he said, no. He said, turning into one of the greatest. He meant Manny. And then he said, Manny Ramirez is a professional hitter. Professional hitter. I don't even know what he's talking about. But what I think, I never heard that term before, professional hitter. You probably never heard of that except for him. And the one thing I found really interesting is, Manny had his flaws on the bases. Manny had his flaws in the outfield. But, man, when it came to hitting, did he have a flaw? He didn't chase bad pitches. He didn't look like he wasn't interested in being at the plate. This guy came up there and just – I'll take one back from that. Another time at the batting practice cage, and there's John Hart and Mike Hargrove. And Manny comes in, and John Hart goes, watch this. Watch what? Is Manny's going to start banging him out of the ballpark at Jacobs Field? No. Manny starts taking swings. He hits like 8 of them to right field. Then he hits like 5 to center field. Then he yanks like 4 or 5 down the left field line. And he goes, you see that? He goes, this guy's just taking it upon himself to hit to all fields. He goes, while other guys want to jack it out of here, or, see how far they can hit it, and they're betting other guys to hit it out of the ballpark, or how many in a row they can put into the seats. He's just spraying the ball different places. And I think that's what John Hart just loved that guy, and I think we all fell in love with how he could hit. But to watch him take hitting seriously, and he knew he was great at it. You knew he was great at it, because he could do whatever he wanted to and spray it when he wanted to. I mean, I don't know how many opposite field home runs that guy has, but Jim Thome once told me, he said, when I learned how to hit was when I learned how to hit with power to the opposite field. And he said, I could watch that out of Ramirez.
Something, Mark, the real cool thing about what Manny was able to do as a hitter that we saw on a daily basis when he was a baby in 1994 as a rookie, all through those 8 seasons in Cleveland, the wow moment against Dennis Eckersley, all those types of things that Manny Ramirez did. It never looked like he would, especially at the plate. He was so calm at the plate. He was so matter of fact, because you knew the legend of how much this kid prepared. A lot of people just made a joke about see ball, hit ball, but it was so much more. He had books on guys. He knew what other pitchers were up to. I mean, you saw the preparation, didn't you? On a daily basis.
Yeah, you're right, John. And the other thing is it was very admirable to his teammates. Sandy Alomar in particular. Yeah. Sandy Alomar was I think, a very quiet leader amongst the Latin guys. You
Yes, he
know,
was.
I mean, Carlos was a character. Omar is a kind of character. I mean, we had our, John, as you know, they're characters,
Espinosa.
they're good, talented, everything. But Sandy, as the catcher, to me, he was probably the captain of the team, in my opinion. Young also, but just had that. Obviously he had the baseball pedigree from his father, but he also just understood it, and he was smart, and he knew how to control, I think, all of that, and I know he had really interesting admiration for Manny and his hitting, especially in spring training when you get a chance to just talk to the guys more than you can during the regular season, in my opinion. But you could stand there and see and talk with them about his hitting, or, Bartolo Colon's fastball moving, those type of things. I found it fascinating that his own teammates were enamored with what he could do at the plate.
Yeah, he was just so much fun to watch, and kudos to you for pointing out the whole left field, right field, center, how his batting practice was, because it never really was. Sure, he could crank one out if you wanted him to, but I don't think that was ever the point of his batting. I know Tito telling a story about the hand-eye coordination, some of the drills that were done. I remember being in spring training with Ellis Burks when they had those tennis balls that were shot at you like at 110 miles an hour, and he's trying to find out where the number 6 was on one part of the baseball, of the tennis ball, to work on your hand. And Manny was doing that in the early 90s, drills like that. And I thought his ability to be amazing, but his preparation even more amazing. And you brought up a good point too about the culture of the team back then, with Manny being a focal point per se, but not necessarily the overriding attention, because you had Albert Bell, you had Sandy Alava, Carlos, and you had Kenny Lofton, the table setter. But didn't you think it was like the best atmosphere for a young kid to break into? He wasn't high in the order, he was down in the order. Tommy was batting ahead of him, and all those types of things. And the veterans that they had on the team, El Presidente, Oral, maybe just the perfect kind of a mix of vets and kids, Manny being the baby of them all.
I agree, John. And I think another fascinating aspect, I think, was, I'll give you a funny example. This happened in 97. So in 97 in Winter Haven, we're there for spring training. I can't remember who the videographer was, but we're in the clubhouse, and everybody was just kind of getting into the clubhouse. And I know you remember this, but the music would be loud. The music was loud. And so the music at the time was being played was a little softer. And I'm speaking with Matt Williams. Okay, I'm doing a little introduction. Nice to meet you, who I am, all that stuff. Can I also ask you some words? And so I said, sure. So we start to talk because Matt Williams had just come to the Indians. And I'll never forget, out of the corner of my eye, I'm watching Manny walk in his underwear over to the stereo. And he takes it and he cranks it. I mean, cranks it. And he starts laughing, and everybody's looking because it's blaring. And you can't do the interview, it's done, And so I'll never forget, Manny looks over and he's laughing, and he looks right at Matt Williams. And Matt Williams gave him a straight face of, And Manny takes 2 steps back and he lowers the volume. And he walks back like a dog with the tail between his legs back to his locker. And I'm like, but that's that leadership that Matt Williams brought. And that's, to me, I really believe that's why they got there in 97. I mean, they were all over the place in 97. And Matt Williams, even though he had a lot of personal things going on in his life, he kind of drove them, I think, to that World Series. I think he was the guy. But all of those leaders, all of those guys, I think the young guys learned when to play, when they couldn't play. And I think, Kevin Seitzer was another one. Seitzer had a very, very fun personality, but man, he was serious about playing. He was serious. I mean, he could hardly run or walk with those bad knees, but he could hit, and he was a great leadership role. And all of them, I think, it's funny. It's hard to, John, people will ask you about what's the chemistry, in a clubhouse. You see it. You feel it.
Yeah.
You see it. You know it. You know if the teammates respect each other or they clash and they hate each other,
Yeah.
And the difference between like when I started working at Channel 8 in 1983 and going into the Indians clubhouse in 1983 and 84 at the old stadium and watching this horrific baseball team drinking beers at the time. They could drink beers in the clubhouse, smoking their brains out with cigarettes. And then you go into the opposing clubhouse and these guys are straight edge. They're getting ready, to get out of there, put their suits on, and they're ready to go. And you're like, holy smokes. No wonder they made the movie Major League. It looks true, So that whole thing of that chemistry you saw, I mean, even when you went in, John, did you not feel like it was like electric? There was something just so energizing when you walked in that clubhouse in those years.
Yeah, it really was. And the fun part too was you felt it around the ballpark as well. So it was, as you mentioned, Manny's rookie year, they're starting to find their way. They made the break from the old ballpark. They're in the new ballpark. Better talents there. They went and got Omar. Omar comes to Cleveland. You've got Manny batting way back in the order. You got Jim Thome. You have Kenny Lofton setting the table. There's Albert Bell. His presence is always felt no matter where you were. And through all that, you had this babe in the woods, if you will, from Washington Heights, New York, in the Bronx, who just, it looked like when he was at the plate, that is what he was put on this earth to do. And he had 8 seasons in Cleveland. And earlier in the pod, before we came to our interview with you, Mark, I kind of outlined some of the things that he did. And this is just as an Indian. Of course, now we're going to add on the stuff that he did in Boston. And where do you think he ranks? I mean, obviously with the off the field stuff, the allegations of steroids and all that stuff comes into play. But where do you put this guy? What kind of a category? Can you shoehorn him into one of the greatest right-handed bats that the franchise has ever? Where do you put him? Can you put him anywhere?
I think that's a great question, and I'll start with this. I got lucky enough and have to be old enough to be able to say I saw Willie Mays play. I got to see Clemente play. Thankfully, when I was a kid, I got chance to see National League ball growing up in Chicago. So I got a chance to see both the White Sox, I got the American League and I got the Cubs on the north side. Right. So though I was small, you can watch these guys. Plus I love baseball. I love studying these guys. And I never got a chance to see Ted Williams. Bob Feller said he was the most unbelievable hitter he's ever faced or seen. And that's over DiMaggio, So, and I think a lot of people say that Ted Williams was the greatest all-around hitter, not just left-handed. But one thing Williams did that Manny didn't do is Williams was a dead pull hitter. That's why Lou Boudreau told me he created the shift against him, because he knew Ted would never bunt, he would never go to left field, and he would never go to center if he didn't have to, right? He was always yanking it. So the challenge was, that Boudreau said, I know he had to hit the ball through that shift. And so that's what happened. I never saw Ted take batting practice. I can only imagine he just kept yanking everything into right field, right? But then again, let's go back. Manny Ramirez spraying the ball all over the field and never trying to yank balls into the seats in right, center, or left. He just wanted hard contact, line drives, spray it, here, pitches outside, it's going to right field. I can still see him one time in a situation where the Indians were behind. I can still see this in my head. He leaned over for a pitch that was in the outside corner, about knee, maybe shin high, and he laced this thing down the right field line for extra base hit and ended up winning the game for the Indians. He could have waited, he could have swung and missed, he could have whatever. He just knew to lace it out there because the runner had to come in from second base to come rolling in. If he yanks it to left field, he's going one base, right? It's a base hit to left field, one base for the runner. Who knows what happens next? In 1999, he drives in 165 runs. Incredible. In 1999. 169. Nobody has done that since. Nobody has hit brought in at least 165 runs since 1999. Now, let's go back before 1999. The last guy who could put in 165 runs across the plate in the American League, it happened in 1937. Hank Greenberg.
Wow.
So you're sitting there going, how does this guy hit? How good of a hitter was he? How good could he drive in runs? He's always up there. So, yeah, okay, he ends up with 555 home runs. That's phenomenal. Okay, I don't know how many of those are steroid-induced or whatever. It doesn't really matter. He's what, the third leading home run hitter in Indians history, Guardians history. Boston, same kind of thing. He almost hit the same amount of home runs in Boston as he did in Cleveland, right? So, he's 12-time All-Star. He's the MVP of the World Series for the first time in 2004 for the Red Sox. He is. In all honesty, he is probably one of the top three guys I've ever seen play. And that's talking about George Brett. I think Brett was a phenomenal hitter. I really, really do. And Wade Boggs was a great contact hitter. But Manny had the contact and the power. And I just love how, again, he wasn't a one-field guy. He could just do the job to where the ball was. He wasn't Javier Baez chasing balls, breaking balls 3 feet outside the strike zone. He knew his strike zone, and when he contacted, bang, it was something that was going to produce runs or get on base. And I think he just loved hitting, John. He just loved it. The other aspects, maybe not so much. Maybe bored, at times.
Yeah, I think he was just so much fun to watch him do his thing. And Mark, when you were on the Indians beat, you were at the ballpark so much, and we were doing live shots there, left and right, and what have you. You got to be good friends, and Julian Tavares became, a guy that you would rely on, to give you good quotes and things of that nature. And he and Manny were kind of, right there together, right? Frick and frack, mutton, what was that relationship between those two guys, and any wild stuff come out of that?
All right, I'll give you a great story. Now, I'm still very good friends with Julian. He lives in Cleveland, which is fantastic. His son is actually now playing baseball in Strongsville, he looks even just cooler. Like his dad, tall, lanky. It's fun to see. He actually came to Texas a couple of years ago to play a Little League game in Laredo. So Julian and I went to go see him play. Anyway, Julian Jr. So anyhow, getting into the situation, because Julian and Manny came up together. They were drafted together and came up together through the minors. Manny got up a little bit faster than Julian did, but they've stayed really good friends. I'll give you a good one. And we're in the clubhouse. Can't remember what year it was, but it was in that 95 through 98 period, maybe 97 period. And so we got there early. It was videographer Ron Mounts and me, and we're in the clubhouse, and I'm actually waiting for Julian to come over. So I needed to ask him something. And it's a little early. Julian hadn't arrived, and a handful of players were in the clubhouse. I watch Manny Ramirez come walking over, and he says hi. And he walks over and he starts combing through Julian's clothes. Okay, his baseball stuff. You're looking, he's going through like that, and he takes off the rack. Okay, they didn't fold their underwear. They had it hanging. Those game underwears. Okay, those sliding protectors and all that stuff. Okay,
long johns. Yep.
Yeah. So he takes that off the rack like that, and he starts giggling, and he starts walking over to his locker, and so he takes off his clothes and he puts on Julian's underwear, and he's just walking around in his underwear with no shirt on, no socks, nothing. So Julian comes walking in maybe 10 minutes later, comes over to his thing, he starts talking. I don't say a word to him. Mounts doesn't say a word to him. And we're talking stuff, and then Julian starts getting ready, and he starts looking through. And he's looking and goes, like, where's my underwear? So he calls over the clubby, and the guy comes over and goes, oh, man, I put all that stuff there. It should all be there. And they couldn't figure out what's going on. I looked over at Manny. He's laughing. He's on the other side laughing, totally not acknowledging what's going on. So then Julian starts getting mad, and he's yelling out in Spanish and in English, "Who's got my underwear? Who stole my underwear?" And it was so funny. And everybody's looking around like, what? What's going on? And there's Manny not looking. I mean, looking too obvious by not paying any attention. And he looks around, and Tavares gets heated, and he runs over there, and he's screaming at Manny in Spanish, about his underwear, taking his underwear. And Manny's like, "You want me to take it off?" He starts pulling them off, and he's like, "No, I'm not. Put those things back on. I don't want to touch those things, So Julian had to get a new set of underwear from the club, because Manny stole his underwear. But Manny's also, I don't know if you remember this, John, but going in the clubhouse, I don't believe Manny was ever superstitious, ever. However, he was a character, right? He's a character no matter what. So I don't know if it's the same year or not. All I remember is he was wearing the same underwear for every game. And now it got washed, but it was the same underwear. So the holes on the side from sliding started small, then they got bigger. Then the next thing it was a tear. Then the next thing, his right cheek was hanging out while he's still walking around the clubhouse in these underwear. And he wouldn't change.
Not superstitious at all.
Put in the new underwear, right? Do you remember that?
Yeah, and again, I think he absolutely. I think they're all creatures of habit, and if something works nicely, they're going to keep it. They're going to keep that. But he and Julian, it was so fun to see how excited they were when the Indians made the playoffs for the first time. I still remember that night. Everybody walking out to center field, they're going to raise the flag for the, winning the division, and then the song, the Garth Brooks song in remembrance of Steve Olin. And I remember Julian just yelling, "We're going to the World Series. We're going to the World Series." And, it was just so much fun to watch those guys grow up right before our very eyes. And we saw Manny grow up to be one of the greatest hitters that the franchise has ever seen, and baseball as well. It's just a blast to kind of remember some of those times. And Schrade, you were right there front and center for so much of it.
Oh, thanks, Sean. I'll tell you, because of my friendship with Julian, I had, and a little bit of Omar too, I had an opportunity to get in a little bit tighter, just as a person, not as a reporter. And then you'd find things out, whatever like that. But everything was pretty, what needed to be reported was, and what wasn't, his friendship, right? So. Right. The interesting thing is Julian Tavares invited me to the Dominican Republic at his home in Santiago, Dominican Republic, to be able to participate in a charity-based softball event that he would hold each year. It's on the field that he grew up on to play. Which
is real cool.
Yeah, and this is within a very, very poor, deprived little community. Very, very poor. And when you say dirt poor, it's literally dirt. The streets are dirt.
So true.
It's tough. It's very, very tough. However, he wanted kids to be able to have a chance like he did to play Little League. So he supported this by, with his monies and things to get kids T-shirts, and have a big celebrity softball game to bring out the community. This was 2001. Manny left in maybe 2000, because Manny's with Boston at the time. So Julian gets Manny to come out to this event in the Dominican. And he also, I think, had the two biggest characters I think I've ever seen on a baseball diamond, Jose Lima and Manny Ramirez, in this celebrity tournament. So the two sides are drawn and everything. And Manny's a little bit late coming in. Manny has no baseball stuff with him or anything. And so Tavares gave him a shirt to wear, a Florida Marlins shirt, because Julian was playing for the Marlins at the time, and a Marlins hat, stuff like that. So he's got his stuff, but he had nothing. When Manny came up and people realized who he was, I thought Jose Lima got a huge reception. It was like I could only imagine what Babe Ruth was like around kids. It was the most amazing thing I had ever seen. John, the game was going on, and kids and adults were run out of the stands. And they would run over to him in right field to get hugs with him or high five with him while the game's going on. It was the most amazing thing. And he came to the plate, and people are cheering and screaming, and playing music. I wish there was video at the time of that, because it was the most amazing thing. And I think that's what people understood about him, and how he could play, and how he could hit, and how, and how good he was, and how popular he was. I mean, every time someone says Manny Ramirez, does a smile not come to your face?
100%. Absolutely. Every
For a
time
lot of
I
reasons.
saw some social media stuff from the ballpark this weekend when Manny was brought in, to be put in the Guardians/Indians Hall of Fame, and just that playfulness look on his face when he's coming after the ceremony and coming past a few reporters, and just had that look on his face, and I'm always going to smile when I think of Manny Ramirez, and also smile when I think about the times we had all those years working at Fox 8 at Channel 8 and covering those great Indians teams. It was such a hoot, and Manny was right in the heart of it all, and that's the big reason why I wanted to have you on the pod here, Mark, to kind of remember that, and also pay our respect to one of the greatest Indians of all time. Now, update for our listeners who may remember you from your days as a sports reporter in Cleveland. You made a clear break from the business, and you're an auctioneer, which is what a change. Tell me how that came about, and quickly, if you can, just how that's been going. Plug yourself if you want, however you want to do that, but bring our friends up to date on what's going on with you, Shrades.
Thanks, John. As you know, many times when we would answer the phones, there would be a nonprofit organization who would ask you to be the MC for an event. And if you could make it happen, you would accept it. So I know you've done hundreds and hundreds, if not over 1,000 of these over your lifetime. And the same thing was happening with me, which was fantastic. So I would accept, and then you would notoriously get to a point in the evening after you're doing your MC duties, they would say, hey, we've got like 6 live auction items. Would you mind doing the auction for us? And it would say, I would tell them, I don't know what to do. I'm not an auctioneer.
Yeah,
and
that's an art.
Just do it. Just go ahead. So lamely, if that's even a word, I'd be so lame at doing it, but I didn't know what to do. I didn't know the increments. I didn't know, I couldn't speak fast in a auction chant. I didn't know what to do. So I was actually conducting an event in Solon one evening, and they actually had hired a professional auctioneer, a young guy, and who became a friend. And we kind of hit it off, and he asked me if I would help him out as a bid spotter. I said, sure, whatever you need. So I did. It was fun. And he said, hey, I got another one in Twinsburg coming up in a few nights. If you're available. And I said, yeah, I live in Twinsburg. Yeah, sure. I can do that. So I helped him out there. And so over a course of about a year, I was helping him when I could, different times, to basically be a bid spotter. And so we, in our friendship grew. So one night where I had helped him, we flew to Kansas City for an opportunity to help on an auction for basically, it was for plant liquidation. And because he was doing all kinds of stuff. And he said, Mark, he goes, I think you should become an auctioneer. And I said, I don't know. I said, I said, I'm not so sure. He goes, no. He goes, you can handle a microphone. And I said, well, it is kind of like doing a live shot. You're in front of people and you're doing your microphone. I said, it seems like it would be easy to speak in front of people. Sure. He goes, yeah. He goes, you should go to auction school. I said, auction school? There's a thing. There's such a thing as auction school?
This is a thing?
Yeah. What? So I looked into it, and I said, if I don't embarrass myself, and if I'm the only person, in the Cleveland media that is licensed as a professional auctioneer, maybe it's something fun to do, for some extra money or whatever, just for fun. And I tested myself one year. I said, look, if I can get X amount of auctions, make X amount of money, I really like this. This is fun. So I took the route of benefits because I like benefits. I like raising money for different organizations, different schools, and for all nonprofits. I've done planned liquidations. I've 4-H. I've done, a number of things. But I really come back to the nonprofits. And so I exceeded both. I got more auctions than I expected, and I made more money. And I said, look, I really like this. I'm out here, and I've done this, and I really love this. And so my company's called Auction Brio. Auctionbrio.com is my website, and I just love it. And it's funny, people will ask me, what does Brio mean? Where'd you get Brio?
Yeah.
I said, well, Brio in Italian means energy, and if you've ever met me, you'll get it.
Yeah, just a little, Shrades, just a bit. No, you are, you're the 1,000-watt bulb, and you burn bright 100% of the time. And I've been to events that you've done. You're phenomenal. And anyone out there that has an idea for a charity and they have an event in the Cleveland area or down in Texas, you live in San Antonio, Mark is just outstanding. So I wanted to give you a little plug as far as that was concerned. And Mark, it's always a pleasure. Great stories on Manny Ramirez, one of the most fun athletes we've had in Northeast Ohio in all these years, controversy or no controversy. So I always laugh when I think of Manny Ramirez. So thanks again for coming on the pod, and I look forward to talking to you soon on things non-Manny Ramirez related.
Well, and one last thing, John, if you don't mind me adding.
Sure. Absolutely.
Three greatest hitters I have ever seen. Okay.
Yeah.
To me, Clemente, Mays, Manny Ramirez. I really believe that. Three greatest hitters I've ever seen. So
that is just absolutely amazing. He is Mark Schroeder. Thanks very much, my friend. And thank you to you guys for listening to the pod today. I'm going to update you just a little bit on where the guards sit as far as their schedule is concerned. We are taping this interview and this part of the pod with Mark Schroeder on Monday, the 21st. It is an off day for the Guardians. They have not done that well in terms of trying to keep pace with the Twins in recent times. And they've got the Dodgers in town for 3 straight games, a Tuesday night, Wednesday night affair, and then followed by the final game in the series, a Thursday afternoon on the 24th, before they hit the road to go to both Toronto and then Minnesota. And they've got quite a bit of distance to close if they have any thoughts of postseason this year. I just don't think it's in the cards, but still, the Guardians with finishing up their homestand with those 3 games against the Dodgers as we speak. So thanks, everybody, for listening to the Guardians of the Land MLB podcast. Your host, John Telich, here on the Press Play Podcast Network. We look forward to the next time that we sit before the microphone and talk to you about anything and all things Cleveland Guardians. But in the meantime, have a great week or two, everyone, and we'll catch you the next time we hit the podsphere, as it were. See you, everybody. Bye-bye.